ship or urgently change course? We'll hear from the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. For the Conservatives, though, was it a disaster, a bloodbath, or just apocalypse? We'll ask the party's co-chair, Nigel Huddleston, whether Kemi Badenoch's days as leader are numbered. Plus, with us throughout the show, former Labour advisor Tom Baldwin, broadcaster Rachel Johnson, commentator Ian Martin, and political commentator and reform supporter Tim Montgomery. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. For generations, British politics has been a two-horse race. The 1960s Tory grandee Reginald Maudling once remarked that Britain is a conservative country that occasionally votes Labour. Even earlier in the 1880s, in Gilbert and Sullivan's political satire Iolanthe, a sentry standing outside Parliament sings that every boy and every gal that's born into the world alive is either a little liberal or else a little conservative. Every now and again, someone comes along and threatens to break the two-party mould, but it's never happened. Until, maybe, just maybe, now. Let's not go overboard. Thursday's elections were local contests and they took place in a small minority of councils. But there's no denying the astonishing achievement of Reform UK in disrupting the dominance of Britain's two major parties. The question now is whether, to borrow the words of the great American songwriter Carole King, this will be a lasting treasure or just a moment's pleasure for Reform UK. In short, is 4- or 5-party competition the new normal? Or is this going to be similar to the transition a century ago when Labour took over from the Liberals as the main rivals to the Tories? Or will we just return to business as usual? I, for one, have no idea, but we're going to try to work out an answer in the next 90 minutes with some of the people who might be writing the script for the next act in British politics. First, though, the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Wes Streeting, your Cabinet colleague, Lucy Powell, dismissed the grooming gangs scandal as a dog whistle issue, presumably meaning a coded signal to racists. Is that how you and your colleagues see the abuse of hundreds of children in British cities?
No, and I don't think that's what Lucy intended to imply in a heated debate on Radio 4, and that's why she's apologised for what she said. I think that's the right thing to do, but you know, I've known Lucy for a long time. I don't think for a moment she would have meant or wanted to imply that raising these issues, talking about these issues, is dog whistle.
But you see exactly what the problem is here. It was a heated discussion, and quite often it is the heated discussion that reveals what is actually in our minds rather than the curated remarks we prepare for television.
I don't know that that's fair.
I don't know if it's not fair. It is just a fact that sometimes that's where people really reveal themselves. So the question I think that would be in many people's minds is this what is really being thought?
No, and look, I would actually say I've got a different take on that exchange, which is we all make mistakes. I've made mistakes in the past. I'm sure I'll make mistakes again in the future. The important thing is when we make mistakes that we own it, we apologise. That's exactly what Lucy's done. On the substance of the issue, this is something the government takes extremely seriously, and it's why since we've come to office, we've cracked on with making real changes that will help to support victims. We've asked every police force in the land to go back on historic cases, to look again at all of those where no further action was taken. We've expanded victims' access to an independent panel which was set up to look at historic cases, but actually we've got rid of the time limitation on that and said, actually, everyone should have the right to go to an independent panel. So, and there's more to come. So we do take the issue seriously. We're not beating about the bush on some of the thorny issues in there as well, around ethnicity, collection of data, transparency.
But this is not the first moment this has come to public attention. A few weeks back, the safeguarding minister, Jess Phillips, was in an argument or this debate in the House of Commons about this. And you have consistently refused to accept the demand for a national inquiry. Now, I don't want to replay that debate, but you can see why people would think that the government actually really has an attitude to this which says it's not that important, we're not going to give you a national inquiry. When somebody, the opposition, pull you up on it, you dismiss it as the Tories never did anything, and so on.
Well, I mean, that is true.
You see how that would be read?
Well, it is true to say that we had 28 recommendations of the
But you see, you're about to do it again, aren't you?
But
you're about to say make this into a political thing.
No, actually, that's not. Actually, I'd prefer the opposite. I'd prefer that we could all move together on what is a serious issue and shouldn't be a party political knockabout. But inevitably, what we've seen since the general election is people who were in government only moments ago saying, you know, why aren't you doing this, that and the other? Have a national inquiry. Now, if they felt so strongly about it, they had the opportunity to do it and didn't.
And there's
a string of recommendations which were not implemented. And the fundamental point, Trevor,
is your point
is
that
we could have another. We could have.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. I do think there's been a degree of playing politics with it, and we would rather that didn't happen. I think that was actually what Lucy Powell was driving at on Radio 4 on Friday night. It came across in a way that she never, ever intended, and that's why she apologised. But I think, look, stripping all of the politics away from it and all of the political noise, there were 28 recommendations that were made by the independent investigation into child sexual exploitation. We're getting on with it.
You've made that point. Your colleagues have made.
But the action is really important, Trevor. I think, and that's what I say this morning. Action speak louder than words. We're taking action, and we'll continue to do so. That's the most important thing.
Just very briefly, is Lucy Powell's job safe?
Yes, look, I don't. As I say, I think she's made a genuine mistake. She's owned up to it. She said sorry, and we'll move on.
All right, let's talk about moving on from last Thursday. You lost 2/3 of the seats you contested. What went wrong?
Well, I mean, I did lots of campaigning in my own patch where we had a by-election run corner across the country. There were definitely individual issues that were raised, but the fundamental thing I heard wherever I went was that same frustration that people voted for change at the last general election, they're not yet feeling it. And I can understand why that is. If I sit here, in fact, as I have done before, and said NHS waiting lists are falling, they've fallen 6 months in a row, the 2 million more appointments we promised, we delivered 7 months early, we're actually over 3 million and we'll be even higher by July. Well, for hundreds of thousands of people who have been seen faster and come off the waiting list, great news. If you're one of 7 million cases still on there, this is the point at which you start shouting at the telly, saying, hang on a minute, you're saying the NHS is improving, I'm still waiting. Now, both those things are true. The NHS is improving, but people are still waiting. If Rachel Reeves was sat here, she'd be saying, well, interest rates have come down 3 times. Great news if you've refixed your mortgage at a lower rate than you would have done, but for lots of people won't have felt that yet. And similarly, wages rising higher than inflation, absolutely welcome step in the right direction. Does it wash away the cost of living crisis? No. So I think people are impatient for change, hungry for change, and so are we.
All right.
And it is frustrating. Change does take time. And all I'd say to people, we've not even been in a year yet, so give us time, give us the benefit of the doubt, and give us the chance to deliver the change that we promised.
We get the point. Your leader responded by saying your plan is to go further and faster, and congratulations, you haven't used the cliche yet. Let's talk about what that actually means. The signature choices you've made since you came to office last July: cutting winter fuel allowance, cutting overseas aid, cutting disability benefits, allowing a record number of people to cross the channel in small boats. Which of those are you going to do more of? Which of those are we going to get further and faster on?
Well, actually, in terms of the choices that we've been able to make, thanks to the investment that we've raised through decisions that I accept have not been popular. I think every single measure that the Chancellor has taken to raise money for the NHS and for other public services has been opposed, and not just on winter fuel or employers' national insurance, but getting rid of the exemption on VAT for private schools, the non-dom tax arrangements she's gone tougher on the wealthy. People always oppose the means of raising the money, but they're always calling for more investment. And you do have to make politics is about choices. We've made choices in order to invest in our NHS, and I'm going harder on reform. You know, we're abolishing NHS England, getting rid of layers of waste and bureaucracy. We are going further and faster on that. And I've got loads of people Trevor, every week saying, oh, hang on, you don't want to go too fast on that. You want to go slower. But the country's crying out for change. So that's what the Prime Minister's talking about and saying going further and faster.
So you've made all these choices, you defend them, and as far as you're concerned, you haven't made any mistakes.
Oh, we will make plenty of mistakes.
No, you have not made any mistakes, is the question I asked you.
Well, on all of those decisions, have they been universally popular? No.
No, that's not the question I'm asking you.
Did we know they would be...
Were any of these a mistake?
No. When we made those choices, we knew they would be unpopular, and we knew that they would be opposed. The reason we made those choices because we genuinely believe they're the right choices to get the country out of the massive hole it was left in. And right across the board, whether it's the NHS, whether it's schools, whether it's prisons, whether it's our defence and security, whether it's crime and policing, there were enormous challenges facing this country when we came in, and we've had to make big and sometimes unpopular decisions so that we can face into those challenges and deal with them. People won't thank us if we just kind of go for the easy life. We want to make the right choices.
You made difficult decisions, you made choices, but they were all excellent choices, and that's why you got hammered in elections and you lost a third of the seats you contested. Does that make... Two-thirds, I beg your pardon. Does that make sense?
I think that, no, as I said at the top of my answer to the local election results, that people do not yet feel that this country is changing. They have not yet felt and experienced that change.
How brilliant you've been.
No, as I said, Trevor, the challenges we came into were enormous. If people do not feel this country has changed, if they have not seen it move in the right direction by the next general election, then people will look for change elsewhere. We know that.
But you know what this sounds like? It sounds like your sat-nav is telling you you've taken the wrong direction, you're about to drive off a cliff, and your answer is, put your foot down on the accelerator. Don't change direction. No,
the message we've taken from Thursday is people want to see the change they voted for delivered. They want to feel this country is moving in the right direction. We know they're not yet feeling the change, but we've got to go harder and faster at things like cutting NHS waiting lists, getting more police on the streets, returning people to other countries who shouldn't be here. We've actually, on deportation, you mentioned the boats. I mean, on deportations, we've actually got deportations up. Thanks to the Home Secretary's actions. There's more to do. That's why she's been working with France. It's why she's been to Iraq to deal with these problems.
We will return to all of that.
But you do not... But, Trevor, the fundamental point is, with the scale of the challenge we came into, you do not turn around all of those problems in 9 months. You just don't.
You've made this point.
All I'm asking people is to give us time, give us the benefit of the doubt, give change a chance.
You've made this point. Let's talk about the people who, I think pretty much everybody recognises came out of Thursday very well, which is reform. And you've just raised the issue of immigration. He, of course, ran very heavily on the government's record on immigration. He also ran on net zero. He's been beating you up. He apparently was agreed with by Tony Blair, who... we can argue about what Tony Blair said, but he basically said that the aim of net zero by 2050 is unrealistic. Farage called for Scunthorpe to be nationalised. You didn't. Is there a real problem for Labour that actually reform is really eating into your traditional working class base?
Well, I think reform is definitely a real threat and one that we take seriously. I think there's clearly... on the right of British politics, a realignment taking place. It's not yet clear whether at the next general election it will be Reform or the Conservatives that are Labour's main challengers. But we've got to take that threat seriously. And in that spirit, I think Reform does deserve more airtime and scrutiny of their policies, because you mentioned the issues that Nigel Farage wanted to fight the local elections on. There were other issues like the NHS where he wilts in the sunlight of scrutiny. He says on one hand, says people who can pay should pay. And then he says, oh, no, but I still want the NHS. He says he wants an insurance system. But he doesn't say who should pay, how much they should pay.
OK.
And that is a real threat to the NHS, and one I think we absolutely
Will you start to treat them now
as
as your most serious opposition?
I certainly do treat them as a serious opposition force. As I say, I don't know whether it will be Reform or the Conservatives that emerge as the main threat. I don't have a horse in that race, but like Alien versus Predator, you don't really want either one to win, but one of them will emerge as the main challenger to Labour at the next general election. But as the Prime Minister said in his article over the weekend, we see as the big issues and the big battlegrounds the economy, the cost of living, borders, and the NHS. Right. And we've got to show by the next election real improvement to people's lives and experiences on all three of those issues. And that's what the Prime Minister wants us to go.
Finally, can I briefly ask you about the interview given by the Duke of Sussex yesterday, which he says he now plans to ask the government to review the case for his security. Is the Home Secretary minded to do that?
Well, I saw the report he was writing to the Home Secretary, so it's probably for the Home Secretary to reply. There are a couple of things I should just point out. Firstly, as a matter of course, we don't comment on individual security. And secondly, this is an independent process, independent of the Home Secretary. There is a committee that decides on these sorts of security arrangement involving the royal household and security services and government. So it's for the independent process to decide. And that decision was upheld by the court. So,
as a matter of principle, the government's view is that it would not be minded to overrule the committee, which is called RAVIC.
It's an independent process, yeah.
Wes Streeting, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's turn to this morning's panel, and we are spoiling you today with 4 panellists for the first time, not our usual 3. The former Labour advisor and Keir Starmer biographer Tom Baldwin, broadcaster Rachel Johnson, columnist and director of next week's London Defence Conference, Ian Martin, and the creator of the Conservative Home website, but now Reform supporter, Tim Montgomery. Tim, let's start with you. You're smiling, but let's just deal with this issue of your exchange with Lucy Powell on the radio programme on another channel. What happened?
I don't really know. I feel exhausted this morning, Trevor. I think I've had about 10, 12 hours sleep over the last 3 nights, and perhaps what Wes Streeting just said is right. She made a mistake, perhaps. I'm very happy to concede that. But what I would say is this seems to be a mistake that Labour keep making, the left keep making. You've actually personally been quite good at jabbing the left on this and have an authority on it. But there's been a tendency, it's gone on for too long now, to close all sorts of important debates down by throwing that racist charge at people. And I think people have had enough of it. I think they feel that it is a stifling of debate. And in the context of grooming gangs, an issue of such consequence, I think it was clearly ill-judged by Lucy Powell. But I think she was keen to have a very strong go at Reform, and I was the representative of Reform that night. But unfortunately, the words she chose have wider resonance. And I think the only trouble if she really is going to get in trouble, it would be if survivors come out in larger numbers and object to what she said.
OK. Tom, Labour doesn't need this right now, does it?
No, I mean, look, I've known Lucy Powell a very long time, and I know that she's dealt with some of these cases in her constituency. It's horrendous, disgusting, shocking cases. And I don't think any politician should be dismissing those concerns as dog whistle. That's awful. I also do think that politicians should try not to politicise this, because this is about the victims. We don't want to see victims and these stories kicked around as political footballs. What we want to see is action. We want to see action to get them justice. We want to see action to stop this happening again. And turning it into a left versus right issue, I don't think it's always very helpful.
I think what is true, though, Tom, is that there are 50 towns where various forms of grooming took place. Labour said they would have local investigations. They haven't taken place. So I take your point about not politicising these issues.
Good.
But the worst thing is if we don't address it at all. And I think there is a gap between what the
don't think
government
anyone's
said they would do and what they are currently doing. And I think they would be... The best way of dealing with this issue is to do those local inquiries.
Rachel, I think
no one's saying we shouldn't address it.
Rachel, I think you heard it. What did you make of it?
It was very hard listening and very shocking. I mean, as the militant centrist mum, I suppose, on this panel, I think if there was a dog whistle being cheaped, what I heard was Labour doesn't want to investigate and interrogate this topic in case it uncovers unpalatable political and racial realities that are going to drive their bloc vote into the hands of the Gaza independents. That's what I heard when I listened to that exchange. A disinclination to order the national inquiry that Tom Baldwin seems to think is required.
Yeah, I mean, it was an extraordinary moment where you just thought, did she really just say that? And, you know, listening back to it, I thought two things. There's firstly, on a basic human level, you know, and I think Tom puts it, you know, put it very well. It was shocking in those terms. But politically, for Labour, when it has reform on its tail, we're going to talk about this later, it set a disastrous tone for Labour, because Labour has to, if it is going to see off reform, show that it takes this kind of stuff seriously.
OK, well, let's return, if we may, to the event of Thursday and the fallout from that. Tom, Prime Minister's basically saying we've got to go further and faster. Is that enough of a response?
I think what the Prime Minister is saying is that he has to face his music. And it's not easy listening, it's discordant. But what I don't think he's going to do is dance to Nigel Farage's tune. Now, we've seen what happens when politicians dance to Nigel Farage's tune. We saw that with David Cameron back in 2013, a difficult set of local election results. And he thought he'd then eliminate the threat of Nigel Farage forever, UKIP as he was then, and call this in-out referendum on Europe. And we saw the consequences for that, an unmitigated disaster for this country, the destruction of David Cameron's political career. So I think what Keir Starmer's going to do is get on with a hard-headed, pragmatic, non-ideological, grown-up approach that he's taken to politics. He's going to push ahead with the infrastructure plan, the industrial strategy, the defence review, the European reset, not for ideological reasons, but for national interest reasons. And doing that is the best course to pursue now, rather than sort of going into some spasm of overreaction because Reform have won some council seats and a by-election. Take it seriously, but the mistake, if there's one mistake worse than not take it seriously enough, is overreacting to this.
I'll come to you in a second, Tim, but what do you reckon, Ian? Good, keep calm and carry on, or think something different?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get these moments in politics, don't you? Maybe even like once in 100 years, where the party system changes. As you said at the top of the programme, we don't know whether that's the case yet. But weirdly, I think this actually things could go wrong for Labour. But actually, I think this moment sort of suits Labour, and you can almost see the contours of the next general election appearing. And Wes Streeting said there, he doesn't know whether it's going to be the Tories or Reform who are going to be the main challenger to the Labour Party. That's a great position, potentially, for Labour. And we know from the 1980s what happened. Margaret Thatcher won her majorities, 83 and 87, because the left was split, because you had the emergence of the SDP. So I think you can see with McSweeney and Downing Street and the Labour plan.
Mr. Sir Keir's advisor.
His guru. I think you can see the beginnings of how they're going to tackle that. And the next election is probably only 3 years away, 2028. And I think their hope will be that Reform emerges the largest party on the right, that the Tories are wrecked, but the vote is fundamentally split, and that Labour can come through the middle on probably something even like 31, 32% of the vote. Probably, if the seats fall in the right way, you end up with a majority of 30 or 40. Now, a lot can go wrong to Labour's left as well, because you have the Greens, you have the Independents, you have the rise of the Lib Dems. I'm not saying it's straightforward, but I think out of these results, you can see the beginnings of where Labour are trying to get to.
We'll come to the puzzle on the left a bit later in the show, but Tim, is there a risk here that all happy this weekend for reform, but actually what's happening now is that the likelihood of Labour winning the next election gets locked in because, as Ian says, the right is split?
No, I don't think anyone who makes predictions in this environment is a fool, I think, because the world is changing so fast. And part of, I think, the answer to your question, will reform last? One of the reasons reform, or a phenomenon like reform, might last is we're seeing it all over the Western world. Something is happening to our politics everywhere. So there's big trends behind that. And what are those big trends? The big trends are Western electorates are incredibly dissatisfied at the moment with what they're getting. And I think there's something unrealistic often about that, but they're unhappy. And they've just seen the Conservative Party fail in office catastrophically. And what I think is wrong with what Tom's a very good spin doctor, and he's done a very good spin on what Labour is doing. But
that's a testimonial, Tom.
No, I'll put that on my CV, I think.
A bit of damn you if you're from me, I'm sure, Tom. But the problem is that, so take welfare reform, which is a subject I know very well because I did work with Ian Duncan-Smith on it. When he introduced universal credit, not only was it a difficult decision, it was a big reform, very far-reaching. The Labour's welfare reforms, they're not actually reforms, really. They are about saving money. What Labour is doing is taking tough decisions, but in very few areas, apart from the construction, it's not going to pay the dividends. And so reform's opportunity is to give the answers that the main two parties haven't. But that in itself, of course, is a huge challenge.
Rachel, you've been a long-time supporter of the idea of breaking the mould of politics and all that. Combined Labour and Tory vote is now at its lowest, actually ever, since there's been a Labour Party. What do you think? Is this a blip, or are we into something new?
It's very difficult to tell. I mean, I'm getting that 2019 feeling when the Euros, Brexit Party won the Euros, and then the Tories had a landslide in the election.
They had your brother, though.
Oh, no, let's leave him out of it. So I'm getting that feeling again. And you said in your intro, has reform peaked too soon? Well, I think there is something in that, because some smart aleck called reform a Potemkin party. I mean, I don't know what Tim would say about that. It may have a ground game. It may have a good air cover. I mean, Nigel's very good at TikTok. But when you don't have more of a party machine, when you don't know if you can make payroll at the end of the month, and where's the money going? That's what I would ask.
Where's the money coming from?
Where's the money coming from? We know about Tory donors. I mean, Tory party is not short of donations at the moment. In the last quarter of 2024, it got twice as much money in as Labour did. I don't think the two-party system is necessarily broken, but I do think this could be good for Labour, along the lines that Tim is saying, because the right is going to split. Unless they do some sort of pact, unless they do some sort of merger, Labour, I think it's looking good for Labour.
OK, more a bit later. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Health Secretary told this programme that the Leader of the Commons, Lucy Powell, did not intend to say calls for grooming gang inquiries were a dog whistle, but he argued that some parties are still playing politics with the issue. He also said that Reform UK is a real threat to Labour after the local elections, urging voters to give the government the benefit of the doubt for the time being. There's plenty still to come, including the Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davey. But for now, let's turn to the opposition. When the asteroid hit 66 million years ago, it may have taken thousands of years for the dinosaurs to go extinct, but Kemi Badenoch doesn't have quite that long to save her Conservative Party. On Thursday, the party often described as the most successful in the history of Western democracy, lost 2/3 of its seats and all of the councils they were defending. It's the first time since the 1880s they haven't ended a round of local elections in control of a single council. A little earlier, I spoke to the party's co-chair, Nigel Huddleston. I'll deal with one thing first. In the interview given by the Duke of Sussex yesterday, he says that he now plans to ask the government to review his case for security. Should the Home Secretary do that?
Well, my understanding is that these are independent processes rather than necessarily directly the responsibility of a government minister. And I think when it comes to questions about royalty, that's probably most appropriate. And I try not to comment too much on royal issues, but I would like to have confidence that the processes are there to do the right thing.
All right, well, let's talk about something briefly that is in your bailiwick. The Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, referred to the grooming gangs scandal in what apparently is rather a heated discussion with Tim Montgomery, the former commentator, former Conservative, as a dog whistle issue.
Yeah.
What did you make of that?
Well, actually, I was on Any Questions on Friday and on the panel. There was a lot of toing and throwing going on between the two of them. Quite frankly, Lucy Powell made quite a lot of, I think, silly comments on a whole range of issues. That was one of them. And actually, instinctively, I agree with Tim on this one. This is a really serious issue. You've heard Conservative MPs, you've heard Kemi talk about the importance of the grooming gangs issue. And to kind of belittle it is completely inappropriate.
Wes Streeting said, to be fair to him, he said she's apologised and so on, but he also accused your party of playing politics with the issue.
No, look, this is a major issue with swathes of the population. I think that shows that, unfortunately, Wes Streeting and the Labour Party have underestimated how big an issue this is, how it resonates with the public, and how they are angry about what they perceive as this government's lack of action here. They made promises about having additional investigations and now have backtracked on it. And they need to be held to account for that. That is not right. They are not doing the right thing. We do need a proper, full inquiry. The public demands that. And I just do not understand the reasons why Labour is so reluctant. It does, and this is why, I'm afraid, it does smack of some kind of political cover-up, because they're worried that it could do some damage to Labour politicians and Labour councils.
Why would it do damage to them?
Because there's accusations that the Labour councils and some of the Labour areas that were responsible for overseeing some of the activities around here did not take appropriate action. And I think they're embarrassed about that. They should be embarrassed about it.
To be fair, these are accusations, right?
They are accusations, but then you clear up the accusations by having a full inquiry. If they don't have anything to worry about, what's the problem with having a full inquiry?
All right, let's talk about the fallout from the elections. And you will no doubt be having your own inquiry about, essentially, the disaster that you lost 2/3 of your seats you contested. Let me just ask you straightforwardly, will Kemi Badenoch lead you into next year's local elections?
Yes, she will. Look, first of all, on Kemi, she's been the leader of the party for 6 months. She was elected by members of the party, and she's establishing herself as leader, and people are getting to know her. But what I have seen, because I've been on the campaign trail with Kemi, is that when they hear what she says, they like what they're hearing. And I think it's really important that we build on her strengths. She is a very, very good campaigner. She's resonating with the public. But the point you're making here is we just lost last year in the general election 2/3 of MPs, and we lost 2/3 of councillors.
But hang on,
recently.
they meet her, they like her, she resonates with the public, and then they vote for somebody else. How does that work if you're a leader of a party?
Because she's been the leader for 6 months.
She's been leader for 6 months. And you've just told me they meet her, they hear her, and then they voted for Nigel Farage.
Who's been around for 20-something years, and people have already established a view and opinion with her.
Come on.
Now, Kemi said...
People don't vote for people just because they've been around for a long time.
Look, well, I think there's two things here. Look, these were local elections, and we were running the elections based on local elections, local delivery of local services, and in particular as well, the failures of Labour. Now, Kemi is a leader that's been around for just 6 months as leader of this party. Nigel Farage is a known quantity for 20 years. She has said all along, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And these are early days. We are renewing the party. It will take time. We knew that all along. But I'm very disappointed because we've lost really good councillors who've done nothing other than serve their communities with huge amounts of effort and dignity and professionalism for a long period of time. And I am really sorry that we've lost so many. And we are renewing the party because we need to make sure we learn lessons from both the general election and these elections, and I can assure you we are doing that.
Leaders are often tested in their response to a crisis. Your leader said on Friday, you are on track. You're actually on track to becoming the second smaller party on the right of British politics.
We took a beating at last year's general election. The British public told us very, very clearly they wanted us to have time in opposition. And what we have to do is use that time in opposition wisely to come up with an alternative government to this country.
Using it to become the second party on the right.
What we've been focused on is holding this government to account. One of the interesting features of politics over the last few months is that we are doing the job as His Majesty's opposition, the 121 of us in Parliament, of holding this disastrous Labour government to account for their utter failings, putting the economy in reverse, winter fuel tax, attacking farmers. We're the ones doing that day in, day out, whereas the other parties spend most of their time attacking us. We're not in government now. We take our responsibility to hold Labour to account very, very seriously. And instead, we've got other parties spending most of their time attacking us. Well, that is interesting in itself.
When you say other parties, you're talking about reform now, aren't you?
Well, no, the Lib Dems just spend all their time throwing bombs across the opposition side of the benches rather than focusing on Labour. This is an important thing. We are His Majesty's opposition. We take that really seriously. Our job is to hold this disastrous Labour government to account. By the way, there is a reason why Labour have dropped in a poll. There's a reason why Labour had disastrous
I've dealt with that with Mr...
Well, no, you asked me a question here about this. You asked me about the strategy.
Yeah, but I've asked you a question, you're answering a different one.
Well, no, you asked me a question about our strategy, first and foremost, is to do our job, which is to hold this disastrous Labour government to account. I know, and we're doing quite a good job at that. That's why they're dropping in the polls.
I know why you want to take us in this direction, which is that you don't want to talk about Nigel Farage and reform. How worried are you about their impact on your party?
There is a mood in the country at the moment not to support the two main established parties. We understand the anger and the frustration of the British public against us. We saw that in the last year's general election, which is precisely why we are going through the process of renewal.
So you're writing off Farage purely as continued protest?
Look, let me answer the question before you go on to the next one, please. Look, Nigel Farage is a force in British politics. He is an incredibly good politician in many ways, but people do know him and he's a known quantity. But the one thing about Nigel Farage is, and we're seeing this again and again and again, he is a populist. He is increasingly saying everything that anybody wants to hear. He's trying to be all things to all men. We are re-establishing ourselves as a credible alternative government based on sound conservative principles and values. And our values and our principles, and therefore our policies, will define the future of our party. Nigel Farage is saying everything to anybody in order to get their votes at the moment, and it's an incredibly effective political strategy in the short term. But you cannot be a party of going around the world trying to get right-wing votes promising low tax and then to other people saying you want, nationalisations and high spending. That's not credible long term. So we will also... the key thing is now, we have an opportunity now to hold reform to account because they've now got some positions of responsibility. They can't just announce things now. They can't just say things. They can't just put a list of all the issues and challenges. They're now going to be responsible for delivering in local government.
So your interpretation of what's happened is Nigel Farage, very powerful campaigner, but this is basically just a phase. The electorate's going to get over it. They will, if you get your ducks in a row, come back to you. You're not worried that actually by 2029 they will supplant you as a leading force on the right? And by the way, as party chair, are you not worried at all that people are going to start, as they have done already, defecting from the Conservative Party to reform, and that by the time you get to local elections next year, you're going to have lost quite a lot of your councillors, maybe some of your MPs?
I would not underestimate Nigel Farage or reform as a fighting force, but there's a reason why populist parties are popular, is because they offer everything to everybody. when they're in a position of delivering things, that's when the shine comes off. Reform won elections last week, promising efficiencies and getting rid of, for example, equalities officers in Conservative-run councils where those roles don't exist. They promised people to have massive reductions in spending and reductions in bills. They even promised, by the way, that they would, that in local councils, the leaflets were all saying, stop the boats and stop climate and net zero. What on earth that has to do with the local council, I don't know. But these are now promises they made, and we will be holding reform to account now as well, because they've made these promises, and I don't think they're going to be able to deliver.
Nigel Huddleston, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, back to our panel, Tom Baldwin, Rachel Johnson, Ian Martin and Tim Montgomery. Let's just talk technical for a moment. You've had the experience of advising political parties, and traditionally what happens is after you've had a disaster, you put the party chairman out on the Sunday shows to get, you know, a smack. How do you think he did?
In a sort of parody Tory chairman way, OK. I mean, you know, now's the time for a pointless sacrifice. Step forward, Mr. Huddleston. And you know, it's OK. We've seen a lot of this over the last few years, and I think the point I want to make is, it's, you know, people want to say this is the end of two-party politics, or this is the most ground-shaking change we've seen since the last groundbreaking change we've seen. But we have been here before. In 2019, Rachel mentioned it earlier, the European elections, the Brexit Party, which is the then vehicle for Nigel Farage, I think won more than 40% of the vote, and the Conservative Party got 8% of the vote. 6 months later, under Rachel's brother, Boris, they won a landslide majority. It's
nice to hear parroting my talking point.
It's an incredibly volatile election. It has been for a while. I mean, but I think 2019 is a good warning for Labour as well, because that's when you saw a splintered left, and that helped Boris Johnson win this big majority. And what you're seeing here is not just votes going off to reform, and Labour are losing some votes to reform, and Tories are losing far more votes to reform. That's where most of reform's votes are coming from. Labour are also losing a lot of votes to the Liberal Democrats, in some places to the Greens. And that splintering is really, really dangerous. Like, you know, Labour's 100 most marginal seats in England, the Tories are second place in 4/5 of them. A 1.5% swing to the Liberal Democrats from Labour hands the Tories a seat. So there's a route to the Tories to recover here, which is because we have a very, very complicated electoral map now, and Labour are fighting on 3 or 4 different fronts.
It is worth saying, though, the Tories are in second place in lots of places, but actually so are Reform. So they're also...
But the most marginal seats, the Tories are in second place.
I think I shared the graph with you, Trevor, on WhatsApp. One of the most encouraging things for Reform that hasn't been widely reported is where we came second in lots of... So not only do you win lots of councils, but we're set up for the next elections to win even more potentially, because it's now very clear in lots of seats Reform are the main challengers. And so there's a great sort of building block for us to go even further. But where I think the attack on Reform and Nigel Farage is mistaken is this whole thing that he's all things to all people. That's not what the voters who are voting for him think. No, they think he is the person who's talking directly to them about issues like immigration and net zero in a way they don't get from other people. They hear caution and tactic and uncertainty from Starmer and Badenoch. Well, where is Badenoch, actually? You know, a good leader would have been out there already.
Yeah, but you're getting the benefit of the fact that the voters are absolutely furious and annoyed with everyone and everything, right? They see the old parties, the old duopoly, as having failed. Yeah. That's very different from actually being running local authorities and doing the hard yards of delivering local services and all of that sort of stuff. So this is, in a way, the easy bit. I mean, I do acknowledge it's an extraordinary political achievement, but it gets tougher from here.
Rachel, just very quickly, you actually been rather critical of Nigel Farage, but I suppose would you agree with Tim that actually you can't mistake Nigel Farage, what Nigel Farage stands for?
Totally. In the 2019, as we keep talking about, Nigel Farage was the magnet and the iron filings were Brexit. He drew the iron filings to him with the adhesive of Brexit. In this election, it's a national issue, not a local issue, and it's immigration and it's net zero. The iron filings have swarmed to the magnet of Nigel Farage. How will this translate over the next 4 years when actually he won't have the opportunity to win maybe that many more by-elections? His base in Parliament is going to be small, but his local base is large.
He's going to give us lots of work for the next 4 years, so I'll stay with us. Pockets of orange pop up across southern England. Where next for the Liberal Democrats? Their leader, Sir Ed Davey, is live after this break. We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Welcome back. If you hear cheering from a garden party on the horizon, it may well be the Liberal Democrats. They're celebrating after winning control of 3 councils, all in southern England, and gaining over 160 councillors. But with the Labour and Conservative collapse on Thursday, should the Lib Dems have done even better? I can speak now to their leader, Sir Ed Davey. Good morning, Sir Ed.
Good morning, Trevor. Good morning.
Well, I know you're very cheerful this morning. Our analysis shows that last Thursday, Reform split the right-wing vote just enough in Oxfordshire and Cambridgeshire to let you gain control. So do you want to start by saying thank you to Nigel Farage?
No, I want to say thank you to all the people who voted Liberal Democrat last week. We had historic gains, winning Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Shropshire for the first time ever, becoming the largest party in Devon, Gloucester, Wiltshire, Hertfordshire, and making gains across the country. It was a fabulous night for the Liberal Democrats. We overtook the Conservatives as now the second party in local government, and I think we're on track to overtake the Conservatives at the next general election. So we're very grateful for all the people who put their trust in Liberal Democrat councillors.
But it takes nothing away from your achievement to acknowledge that this has been made possible wholly or in part by the performance of Mr. Nigel Farage's Reform Party.
Actually, I don't think that's true. If you look at where we've done so well, it's our community politics that have won us lots of seats. Liberal Democrats are well known for getting out there, knocking on doors, trying to get things done.
It was,
as I said during the election campaign,
you don't need to helped you.
Well, and we took a lot of that Conservative vote. You're quite right, Trevor. Look at lots of councils. The Reform failed to break through. It was the Liberal Democrats taking on the Conservatives and beating Conservative councillors. And you don't need to take my word for it. Take the election guru, John Curtis. He said that it was the Liberal Democrats, the only party holding back reform. And we did that all over the country, actually. Look at County Durham, where Labour and Conservatives had a really bad night. Liberal Democrats gained seats, and we're now the official opposition to reform there. So I am really proud of what we've achieved. But the question is, what comes now? I'm really excited about...
I've got a question. The point is, I know you've got a question for yourself, but I've got some questions for you. And I can hear Mr. Farage ringing up and saying ingratitude. But let's just deal with what's actually happened. For 40 years, you've been making the case for a more representative political system. So can we expect now that there is, if you like, a 4-party, at least, situation, Liberal Democrats making the case for electoral reform again?
We have continued doing it for the last 100 years, Trevor, and we continue to do it now. And I notice there are people in all parties who believe what the Liberal Democrats have argued for many years now, that we need a fair voting system where everyone's vote counts. We've got people in the Labour Party who agree with that. They're probably now people in the Conservative Party, I guess, people in the Greens and others. So I think the case for electoral reform is stronger than it's ever been, frankly, Trevor, and we're going to keep making that case. We want to fix the system. You know, one of the things I heard on the doorstep were people unhappy with politics. They feel that they can't trust certainly the 2 big parties anymore. And I think that's why we need system change. And electoral reform is about changing the system. And I would couple that with community politics, which is where Liberal Democrats have done so well. If you're out there in the community, talking to people, listening to people, getting things done, fixing church roofs, as Kenny Bader-Knox says, then you can rebuild that trust, which is so essential.
You would yourself say you've been at this and your troops have been doing this for many, many years. Does it cheese you off a bit that you've been doing this for 20, 30 years, and then Farage comes along with this party, it's only 2 years old, and he's taken a hammer to the mould and actually achieved what you wanted, but it's his achievement, not yours?
Well, listen, I think there will be a lot of people waking up and reading the papers this weekend who will be very worried about Nigel Farage's progress. And I say to them, come and help the only party that stood up to them. Google joined the Liberal Democrats and help us take them on. And actually, I think Labour and Conservatives made a mistake with reform. They've tried to ape them. The Conservatives have copying reform policies, Labour sounding more and more like reform. I think the way you defeat Nigel Farage is by calling him out. And look what happened in Canada with Mark Carney, who was faced with another hard right opponent, or Anthony Albanese just now in Australia, faced with a hard right candidate, both of whom were supporting Trump, just like Nigel Farage does. I think we need to call Nigel Farage out for that. The Liberal Democrats have been the only party doing that, and I think the British people don't want Trump policies here. They don't want hard right Farage policies here. So that's why I think the Liberal Democrats can grow more and more as the core and key opponent of these divisive populist politics, which
when you call him divisive,
Trump and Elon Musk.
When you call him divisive and populist and hard right, are you saying that he and his party are a dangerous intervention in British politics?
Well, let's see what they do in local authorities, Trevor. In the election, they said they wanted to, now they run these councils, they wanted to cut funding on special education needs and disabled young people. I don't think families across the country are going to like that. When the polls closed, they said, didn't they, that, but didn't say it during the election, that they would have Trump and Musk policies in local councils. And, you know, I think people will not like it when reform councils cut the spending on insulating people's homes, because that will mean they'll have less warm homes and higher energy bills. So I think we're happy to take reform on, hold them to account, and we'll be doing that in places like Kent and County Durham and other places where we're the opposition to reform.
Well, you can do something very concrete, can't you? Because there are a number of councils which are now under no overall control. Are you going to forbid your councillors to form a coalition with Reform if the numbers fell that way? That they could be the people who keep Reform out of local government?
Well, I've got something sort of special to tell you, Trevor. Liberal Democrats believe in local democracy, in devolving power, and trusting our local councillors and local people to make the decisions for themselves rather than imposing them. But what I am very, very confident
so you don't mind your local people getting into bed with these terrible, ghastly people who want to take money away from disabled people?
No. You just cut me off. I was about to clarify something, Trevor, so don't put words in my mouth because they're not the words I believe. What I was about to say was I'm very, very confident that Liberal Democrat councils will have nothing to do with reform because their policies, whether it's hitting families with children with special needs, cutting insulation programmes that will keep people's energy bills high, and putting Trump and Musk policies into local authorities, slashing budget. That's not what Liberal Democrat councillors will support at all. We'll oppose it. We think it's the wrong thing for local communities. If we're going to fix things, like fix the roads, fix the potholes, fix social care, you can't go the way of Nigel Farage. I don't think he really cares about those sorts of people. Liberal Democrats do, and through our community politics, we're going to be on people's sides, fighting for them, working hard for them.
We've spoken many times, and you know that I'm a simple, practical kind of bloke. I've looked at some of these councils. Let's take Worcestershire, for example, where Reform won 27 out of 57 seats. To keep them out, you'd have to combine with all the other parties, including the Tories. Similar in Warwickshire, similar in Leicestershire. Are you ready to do that?
Well, let's see what local councillors choose to do. I'm very confident we won't work with Reform. But there's something that's,
you keep saying you're confident.
If I may, Trevor, you keep interrupting me. Can I finish a sentence, please? You'll find in councils up and down the country that sometimes they'll have minority control. It's quite common. And what they do is they put their policies forward, their budgets forward, and they ask people to vote on them. So you don't necessarily have to form the coalitions that you're talking about, Trevor. And what I'm really confident on this huge success for the Liberal Democrats, we'll be pushing forward Liberal Democrat policies. We are the ones who are active in the community, listening to people in the community, representing them. So I'm confident that's what Liberal Democrat councillors will do.
Well, we'll see what they do, and I hope that we'll have a chance to discuss it when the decisions are made locally. Ed Davey, thank you for the time this morning.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Thank you.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel. we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. Back to our panel. Tom Baldwin, Rachel Johnson, Ian Martin, Tim Montgomery. Let's go back to the central question, I guess, that we're asking ourselves today. Are we seeing something fundamental that's changed, or is this just the temporary wave change in the waves of politics? What do you think, Ian?
Well, what could be happening is what's happened in all sorts of countries around the world. I mean, if you look at France, for example, mainstream conservatism basically eliminated, completely wiped out from the system. You look at the United States, where the Republican Party has been effectively involved in a reverse takeover by the MAGA movement, and actually old-fashioned republicanism is now sort of nowhere to be seen. So yes, I mean I've always been a skeptic on that theory. I've always thought that actually the two-party system, or sort of 2.5 in the UK, is actually very resilient. But it may well be that something is actually changing of that magnitude this time.
Tom, I know you're quite sceptical about this, but I seem to remember a former Labour grandee, John Prescott, talking about the tectonic plates shifting, i.e. something fundamental changing underneath politics. Do you give any credence to that idea?
Look, it's possible. All I'd say is there's a danger on programmes like this and weekends like this that we take what's a relatively small number of votes in a relatively small number of council elections and think that the world has changed. We hyperbolise. Now, what we have seen is a really big election in Australia last few days, where there's been a reaction to the sort of Trump world. I mean, Tim was saying earlier that this sort of popular right-wing phenomenon is raging right across the world. In fact, the last two big sets of elections in Canada and Australia, you've seen a reaction. For every action, there's a reaction. And you've seen a reaction. And you've seen a reaction against the Trump, Farage, Doji kind of politics, right? We've seen people say, actually, no, we want sensible, grown-up government in Mark Carney and Anthony Albanese. And so I think there's a danger of, we've had this cycle recently, ever since Trump got elected, of thinking what happens in America must necessarily happen here.
Indeed.
These local elections point maybe that Farage is making some headway, but don't over-interpret. Take it seriously, but don't go wild.
Indeed. I can show you what I sometimes think of as a cold water chart, which is that we, as you say, we all get very excited, but sometimes the facts don't necessarily bear out the excitement. That's the councillor count right now. There's still 6,000 Labour councillors, still 4,500 Tories around the country. Nonetheless, I wonder, Rachel, whether we are still seeing something happening socially. That is to say, the sort of tribes that would have supported in the last 50 years, Labour, trade unions, all of that, the suburbs, whether just socially things have changed to some extent, that the parties are having to readjust.
Yeah, no, I think there is something in that Labour's lost its traditional connection, maybe with the so-called working man, and Tories maybe with the middle classes, and we've seen, we see that reflected mainly, I think, in the local elections. I mean, and this is where people express their opinions on these levels. What Ian was saying is really interesting about, I think that government is almost powerless, whether it's populist or conservative, in dealing with the issues that people are angry about: immigration, net zero, climate change, globalism, all those things. Trump is addressing globalism. But these enormous issues that you're seeing reflected in small local elections, I mean, there is a massive disconnect with what people are voting for and who they're voting for and why they're angry.
Ian, sorry, I know that you've got a big gathering of people from all over the world. I wonder if one of the things that we're learning from this is that the real big division in politics now is about globalization. And actually what we've seen this weekend is two different types of reaction on the right. One which says, go with the flow, that's reality, which is the traditional Conservative position, and one which says, we've got to resist this.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, I run a thing called the London Defence Conference. That's on at King's College London this week, actually, VE Day, pretty timely. But I think that people are also in denial of reality here. That's how I tend to see it. That politics is excessively consumerist, and that actually there's some pretty huge things happening in the world, defence being one of the biggest, which are going to require an adjustment. People are not going to get everything that they want. And this is really tough for politicians because there are a range of choices now on defence, spending more on it, on net zero, how difficult that's going to be. You put all of that together, actually, the voters, they're almost not in a mood to be told the reality. I mean, there is maybe potentially a gap in the market for a politician to come along and say, actually, things are going to be tougher than you expected. That long era post the Cold War is now over, and you're going to have to go back to spending 3.5%, 4%, 5% on defence. The world is much more dangerous than it was in that period post Cold War, and that just requires a sort of reality check, which we, the voters, for all sorts of reasons, are just not really in the mood to hear. We've got some interesting polling on this coming up to coincide with the conference. So I think that's what worries me, is that people are just not wanting to hear it.
What Ian says strikes me that we're talking about the need for, if you like, a political game changer of the scale of, I don't know, Reagan or a Thatcher or indeed a Blair. Yeah. Is Nigel Farage going to be that?
Well, we'll see. I think Rachel said that it's difficult to change net zero and other areas of politics. I disagree with that. I think what voters feel is that the politicians they largely have in power at the moment have a view of net zero, about changing the world in 20, 30 years, and they don't really understand the consequences of those kinds of policies for them now. And they think a lot of politicians are grandstanding and don't understand how it affects them. And they know on immigration and net zero, where Labour promised cheaper energy bills before the election, and they've gone up. Tories constantly promised to control immigration, and they didn't. They look at someone like Nigel Farage, and they think that he really believes what he says. The challenge for Nigel Farage and reform is to move beyond those two sort of signature issues, particularly issues that more women worry more about, the NHS and things. And, of course, it's only 1 year into the Parliament. We've got time to do it. Reform is still a young party. But I don't think the parties are all the same, and there's nothing we can do about it.
And this is where he's going to have a major problem, though, on the Trump front. I mean, this is... his views on Russia and Ukraine are, let's be generous and say, unclear.
He said that Ukraine should join NATO.
Right. Yeah, I know, he's shifted.
He takes a different view than Trump on these things. That's not fair, Ian.
Let's just say that let's say there is a debate.
That was quite a few years ago in a particular context.
But let's say there's a debate about Farage's foreign policy view of the world. In the next couple of years, it looks as though Trump will try and normalise relationships again with Russia. Where will Farage be on that? Is he in favour of increased defence spending? I mean, you would think he's sort of playing... Is he? Really? So he's going to cut welfare and spend it on defence and security?
They haven't done a full budget yet, but he's absolutely committed to extra defence spending.
Yeah. OK, we're just going to go to break in a second, but Rachel, in the end...
Yeah. In the end what?
Real change or not? Real change or...
I think we've seen this movie before.
We've seen it before?
I think we've seen this movie before, yeah. As we keep going back to 2019, we're seeing a repeat of Brexit sweeping the board in 2019 and then the Tories sweeping the board later in the year.
OK. There's a follow-up question there, which...
I know, we all want to ask that.
Could we repeat 2019 literally with himself back in the saddle?
You'll have to ask somebody far more well-informed than I on that topic.
OK. We'll debrief the Conservatives' disastrous local election result with the party. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do in a minute is we're going to talk to the Reform Party's chair, Zia Yusuf.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live all in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from? From the UK?
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Were you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Sky News, get the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. If the local elections belonged to one party, it was Reform. I can speak now to the party's chairman, Zia Yusuf. Good morning. Just how surprised were you at your success?
Well, we're absolutely delighted by the success. But if you remember in June last year, when Nigel Farage, our leader, sat down with the press and said, I'm coming back to be leader of Reform UK, fight a campaign, not just in the general election, but obviously to run for a seat in Clacton-on-Sea to become the MP. He said this was part of a 5-year plan. We have been clear that we want to get Nigel elected as our Prime Minister in 2029 with a majority. We think we can get 350 to 400 Reform MPs. It won't be easy, but yesterday was a historic day. It was a historic day because it was the clear and decisive evidence that the stranglehold that the two old parties have had on British politics for 100 years is finally broken. And that means we can usher in a new era of politics in this country. And that's what we need if we're going to rejuvenate and revitalise the United Kingdom.
Let's unpack that in a moment. But there's a central question. I mean, Nigel Farage and reform, they're in the same sentence. Could you have achieved what you have this week if, for example, Richard Tice had still been leader?
I work with Richard every day. Richard is a formidable politician, but the answer is no. Nigel is, I think it's clear, actually, that Nigel is the most formidable British politician, certainly of my lifetime, and it's a pleasure and an honour to work with him. And by the way, let me give you an example, just a little anecdote about that. In Runcorn and Helsby, where, of course, we won by 6 votes, Nigel visited, I think, 4 times in total. And on polling day, he must have done, we were joking, he must have done about 50,000 steps. He was knocking on doors till 10 p.m. Do you know who never showed up once? Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. Why? Because probably a well-meaning special advisor said, oh, don't show up, we might lose. And, you know, Nigel leads from the front. Who dares wins, and we won.
You've got a lot of inexperienced people now. What are you doing to prepare them for office?
Well, they may not have much experience in politics, but they're great people. And by the way, you kind of need people who have had no hand in the catastrophic destruction of local communities in this country in order to rejuvenate them. So we are setting up, and obviously me as chairman, this rests on my shoulders, and we've been working non-stop. There's really been not much time to celebrate. We're getting all of our winning councillors together over the next 7 days, multiple times. We're setting up task forces. People watching this programme, we're setting up a recruitment drive for the brightest and best in this country, task forces to cut local waste, to help fix potholes, to ensure that bins are collected at least once, if not twice. These are the things that people voted for. They want common sense politics to return.
When you say you set up task forces, if I may say so, that sounds rather Starmer-right. They've set up a review or a task force every 2 or 3 days, and it's not quite what we'd have expected from reform.
This is a task force that is very practical. These are people who will consult.
They're not going to go out and fill in past potholes, are they?
No, but we can look. If you take potholes, for example, this is something that you hear on the doorstep time and time again. You see in all of the polls, people are sick and tired of millions, if not tens of millions of pounds being spent locally by their councils, and not a single pothole is fixed. People watching this programme, I'm sure...
but how are you going to make that different?
OK, so there's a few things we need to do. Number one, we need to make sure that the procurement, the way that these contracts are procured, is done fairly. We have done a huge amount of work. It's one of the reasons we won these elections with such a landslide. We submitted thousands of freedom of information requests to get as much information as we can. From what we can tell, many of these contracts go to these companies that are basically an oligopoly with huge restrictions on new innovative entrants. You've got companies like JCB. Nigel visited them on the campaign trail with a product called the Pothole Pro, which is world-leading. These are not being used at scale in this country. So we need to change the way procurement is done, and that's what we're going to do.
You spoken this morning about remoralising the young. What do you mean by that?
What we need to do is instill a sense of pride in the United Kingdom, a sense of pride in our history. And right now there is a writ large demoralisation campaign that has happened for young people. And you hear it time and time and time again in schools. It's one reason why Reform is polling at 1 in 5 18 to 25-year-olds now support reform, because they're sick and tired of it. And look, we are living in a competitive world. We're competing with countries who don't tell their young people that they should hate their country, that they should be ashamed of their history. And Reform is a deeply patriotic party, and we think we should ensure that children, at the very least, are not being indoctrinated to hate their country. And what they should really be doing, we should be ensuring that they are taught the great things that Britain has provided the world, because there are many, many things we should be proud of.
Let me ask you this then. You just won a major victory, which was fought because an MP punched a man in the street. Your newly elected mayor, Andrea Jenkins, first became famous for giving the finger to protesters outside Downing Street. Now, are we supposed to think that politicians, whether they're Reform or not, are the right people to be giving the young moral guidance?
Trevor, with respect, are you equating what Dame Andrea Jenkins did with what Mike Amesbury did, which was punch repeatedly a constituent almost into unconsciousness?
I'm asking you if politicians of any stamp are the right people to be given moral guidance. And of course, these two things are not equivalent, but I could give you several different examples, some of which are quite unpleasant, about what politicians have done, which don't seem to me to sound like remoralising anything.
Well, look, what we need to do is stop demoralising our young people. So what we're talking about is stop teaching young people in schools writ large that they should hate their country, that they should be ashamed. And look at the character...
Do you genuinely believe that teachers are going about telling children to hate their country?
Look at the character assassination that has taken place on the great Sir Winston Churchill. Look at it, and go and look at the views of young people that have been polled around Sir Winston Churchill. It is a travesty. How many of our young people know who Isambard Kingdom Brunel is, and know all of the incredible things that Britain has given the world? Look, we make no apology for this. Young people should be taught history accurately. And the accurate history is, yes, of course, like any country, there are some aspects of our history we are not proud of. But the vast, vast majority of it, I'll tell you, is we should be hugely proud of. And I would put it to you, no country in the world has benefited the free world than the United Kingdom.
Are you sure you're not calling for the return of the nanny state, where the government tells people how to think and essentially indoctrinates children?
We currently have a nanny state. Yeah, I mean, I just finished an interview where I was asked where could councils cut waste. And I gave the example of Northamptonshire Council, which Reform now thankfully controls. They spent £1.1 million on handing out free vapes. Leicestershire County Council spent £500,000 on a finger-wagging campaign to tell their constituents to brush their teeth. That we live in a nanny state. That needs to stop. But I keep going back to it. We make no apologies. Young people should be taught about the great things that Britain has done for the world.
One of the things you want to do is to get rid of all the diversity and inclusion officials. Councillors cannot sack officials. How are you going to do that?
So what councils can do when they control the council...
cannot.
Councillors, what councillors can do when you control the council is there are vehicles by which... So the chief executive obviously has an important role to play. That role, there's a process by which the chief executive can be hired and fired. We will ensure that in those counties that we are in control of, that the money being spent, not just, by the way, so, you know, this has been misreported that we're just talking about DEI officers. There are huge amounts of money being spent, again, as far as we're concerned, on indoctrination programmes around DEI. We believe all hiring should be merit-based and colourblind, and I'm sure, Trevor, you'd agree with that.
So actually, if council under your control decides get rid of all the diversity and inclusion programmes and the people who do them, and chief executive says, no, I don't think that's really what we want to do, and by the way, it's my job to manage the staff, any chief executive who resists that can expect the sack.
It will be, look, we want to have a good relationship with the executive teams in the councils because they've got to do their job. But let's be clear about something. The people in the constituents are the ones who should determine where their taxpayer money is being spent. And the chief executive...
they can expect to be fired.
The chief executive must ensure that they are following the instructions of their constituents. And that's what our councils will ensure happens.
Just very briefly, will you work with Tories? Just 10 seconds.
There will not be a merger or a pact between Reform and the Conservatives. Why would we? We just beat them by 10 points in the elections yesterday.
Zia Yusuf, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's show. We'll be talking about this for years. Back next Sunday. See you then.